The truth hurts, doesn't it? Oh, sure. Maybe not as much as jumping on a bicycle with a seat missing, but it hurts.
Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
That is us, the BJ Show, because we are Brad and John. Get it? John? Is that tricky or what? BJ Show, Brad and John? Did I come up with a good one when I did that one?
I think we had some extensive discussions. I think we focus group tested that, Brad. I think we did double blind testing. And amazingly, it came back the BJ Show.
But what we decided was we were going to give a limited number of interviews to like 60 Minutes and things like that because we didn't want them to twist our words around, right? Wasn't that what the conclusion we came to?
Well, you and I are not AI-generated robots, which plays into the top 3 stories today, Brad.
Wow.
But you and I are comfortable having freewheeling conversations. We're not one of those AI-generated robots.
That's John, as he's known in the business, Mr. Segway Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T, and he puts together every single day for 23 years now. He won't tell me the anniversary date. That's a highly guarded secret. Matter of fact, we could file a Freedom of Information Act or a Sunshine Law request, and we would get, what would we get, John?
You would get absolutely, 0.0.
Yeah.
I'm a sovereign citizen, Brad. That was almost in the top 3 today. Maybe we'll talk about that story.
Well,
but I'm a sovereign citizen. You can't FOIA me.
He puts together this list of what he thinks are the top stories in the state of Missouri. Some of them are politically inclined. Some of them, occasionally there's a human interest kind of thing. John does have a soft spot in his heart. We haven't found it yet, but we know it's there somewhere. And some of them are just plain bizarre, weird stories that involve public figures. We start the show off with, I can't talk this morning. We start the show off with this guy.
I'm Casey Kasem.
He comes in because he's doing the countdown.
Now on with the countdown.
And we start off with...
In third place...
A little bit of surprising news from St. Louis City, Brad. You and I have talked much over the last 11 glorious months that we've been on the air together about the booming marijuana sales market in the state of Missouri. But this headline from St. Louis Public Radio would seem to contradict that, at least in one municipality. St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippman reports that recreational marijuana tax collections are lagging in St. Louis City. So St. Louis City Budget Director Paul Payne told the Board of Aldermen that the city would be coming up short of what they anticipated in getting recreational marijuana revenue. The city was expecting about $2.4 million, and that's roughly $200,000 a month. But Mr. Payne says, I don't think we're going to quite make the $2.4 million, but it depends on what the future months hold. So, Brad, what I don't have the answer to, and what I'm ignorant about, I guess you could say, is whether or not recreational marijuana sales are really lagging in St. Louis City, as the headline would suggest, or whether St. Louis City's estimate of what they'd bring in was a little bit too ambitious. So it could be either one, Brad. And not to be flip here, but St. Louis City has been known to be a little bit off on some budget estimates, whether it's for spending or for revenue. So I think if I had to quibble, Brad, I would quibble with this headline and say that maybe marijuana sales aren't lagging. Maybe it's not the sales. Maybe it's just the expectation was a little bit too high.
And that was $2.4 million for a year. Is that a fiscal year or calendar year?
That's correct, Brad. Yep.
Okay.
And
now,
as we've talked about, the medical marijuana sales have fallen off a cliff because if you were kind of on the margin and you pretended to need marijuana for your headache or your imaginary malady, you can just go out and get recreational marijuana now.
Well, okay. I'm not a math guy, and you're better at math than I am, correct?
I wouldn't say so, Brad. You're a numbers guy. You're a businessman.
Okay. If you take 3%, which is the tax that the city is entitled to, correct, for the marijuana tax?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So in other words, let's extrapolate that. How many millions of dollars of revenue is that? If it were 10%, that would be, if we could do it that way, we round it up. If we're 10%, they would be doing what? $24 million in
so let's
sales.
multiply that times 10.
So if you figure if it's only 3%, you'd probably triple that, or 3%. I'm spitballing here. So we're talking like $75 million in sales. I mean,
that seems by your math, Brad, and I trust that math. That seems about right. So it's still a huge number. But what I would, if I had to speculate, just to be a contrarian here, I would say that the city was probably being ambitious. You know how city governments do, Brad. Some of them just over anticipate. They do the opposite of the Brad Hildebrand model, which is under promise and over deliver.
Okay.
And they just expect too much money coming in.
I've always been in awe of these guys who are economists. Economists always fascinate me. Okay, so let's go with a finite barrel of money. Let's say that the city of St. Louis, the people that live there, there's a finite amount of money that they can spend. Okay, so what are they not spending money on that they used to spend money on? You know what I mean?
Brett, that's a great point. I don't mean to interrupt, but as we get closer to, and as inflation continues to increase, the Biden-Harris administration tells us that inflation has been defeated. But in the real world, Brad, as we go into the winter and as inflation creeps back up, as I would expect it to do, to your point, Brad, what do people stop spending money on? Do they stop I thought of this exact thing when I read the story, Brad. Are you going to cut out a little bit of cannabis from your monthly budget, or are you going to eat at Popeyes one less time per week?
Well, no. What I'm saying is, if they're spending that money on marijuana, what were they spending it on before? Were they going to the bar? Were they going bowling? Were they going to the casinos? Were they, buying new shoes?
Yeah, maybe some combination of that. I don't know.
Don't get me going about the once again, Brad see, now what's crazy about this is, if I really took this seriously, and let's say I called up Bill Eigel and I go, Bill, I want your help on something. I'm going to try to get a new, because, you Republicans cannot get the constitutional amendment thing changed in the state of Missouri where, if I get a bunch of signatures, I can get a constitutional amendment. Matter of fact, my favorite one was, remember the Brad Bradshaw version of the marijuana thing? Remember that?
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Where he was going to be, it was his amendment, and he was, if the amendment passed, he was going to be the czar. He was going to be.
I love that point.
He essentially wrote himself his own job. But once again, escorts for education. Let's just make prostitution legal. Let's just make it legal. And once again, little Jimmy's going to school. He's got new textbooks. Why? Because you voted for escorts for education. Yes, legalize prostitution. Yes, what used to be in the dark parts of the Washington Stroll area, I have to be old enough to remember what that was.
Oh, the Stroll.
Is now totally legal. And it's come out from the shadows. And it's good for little Jimmy, because little Jimmy has new books at his school, and his teacher got a raise. And the St. Louis school district actually bought some school buses that they can operate. Isn't escort for education great? Yes, you made it. And coming soon, meth for math. Yes, if you vote the new meth, Constitution Amendment in, 100% of the tax collected will go for math teachers in the state of Missouri. Yes, it's meth for math. Meth for math. Your kids will no longer be upstaged by those Asian kids who can do calculus in their head. Your kids will now be getting the finest education, meth for math. How's my commercial going, John?
I love it. You would bring together libertarians and big fruitcake liberals. And when it comes to strange political bedfellows, that leads nicely into story number 2.
And that is?
Up a notch to number 2.
The Post-Dispatch, via reporter Jack Suntrup, has news on one of the rare, exciting races in the St. Louis area, Brad. As you look across the state, there's really only a handful, or maybe 2 handfuls, of races that are super competitive. None of the statewide races are competitive, but a few legislative districts are. And Brad, there's a race in West St. Louis County that maybe a year or 2 ago, people would have considered an easy Republican victory. But now Democrats are looking at this race and thinking they might have a shot out here. And the race is between a gentleman named David Gregory, who's a former state representative from West St. Louis County, and a gentleman named Joe Peerless, who's a former executive from the Drury Hotel Company. Now, Jack Suntrup's piece doesn't mention that Joe Peerless used to work at Drury and is close with the Drury family. I'm surprised Jack didn't include that because Jack usually includes a lot of relevant details. But the point is, Brad, there are so few competitive races throughout the state of Missouri that Democrats are sending a lot of resources into this district. By resources, I mean money, staff, folks knocking doors, folks doing mailers. When I mentioned in the lead into this, Brad, strange bedfellows, the Post-Dispatch reports that not only is Joe Peerless getting help from pretty left-wing operations, the ones that you would consider typical progressive Democratic groups, but Joe Peerless has been endorsed by the Missouri Chamber of Commerce. And Missouri Chamber of Commerce was formerly, back in my day, they were one of the cornerstones of Republican campaigns. Whoever the chamber was with, Republican voters pretty much would look at that endorsement and say, hey, this is our guy or our gal. And the Missouri Chamber of Commerce is doing mailings, Brad, on behalf of this Democrat, Joe Peerless, out here in West St. Louis County. And one more thing before we talk about it. The Democrats' hopes are pretty much that in a district that might lean, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8% Republican, having the abortion amendment on the ballot will drive Democrat turnout, the theory goes, and make some of these races that were out of reach a little bit more competitive. Now, Democrats still have a few other districts where candidates are trying to get attention. They're wasting time, in my opinion, Brad. If I was a Democrat, I wouldn't waste any of my time or resources out in a place like St. Charles County, where they got some patsy to run against Adam Schnelting in a safe Republican district. I don't know why you would waste your money contributing to a campaign out there or knocking doors for a campaign out there in a non-competitive race when you could work in a district that's actually competitive. Now, I'm not in the business of giving Democrats advice or helping them, but this race is actually competitive now. And I think you see David Gregory busting his butt and, have his campaign team out and doing what they have to do. But this race will actually be close, Brad. So it's a surprise out here.
Okay, John, I missed it if you said it. What are they running for? What position? What?
It's a state Senate race.
State Senate race.
It's District 15, and it's currently held by a guy named Adam Koenig.
Is he termed out?
Yeah, Andrew. I said Andy. Andrew Koenig. Yeah, he ran for state treasurer this year, Brad.
And this district is, I would imagine, what, Wildwood, Chesterfield kind of area, that area out there?
Yep, you're exactly right. I think a little bit of Baldwin, this West County area. And it's, another confounding thing, Brad, is that the Missouri Chamber of Commerce mail that they're doing talks about how Joe Peerless is a supporter of the police. He believes in law and order. David Gregory's campaign points out that Joe Peerless actually contributed to Cori Bush's campaign back in 2021. So that's going to be a hard one for the Peerless campaign to answer.
Interesting. And mainly because of the fact that now we no longer have any Cori. What do you think is going to happen to Cori? I mean, once, coming in January, January 21st, she'll be out of office.
Yep.
What do you think is going to happen with her?
I think she will be much happier. I think that it's been hard for her to provide for herself and her family being constrained by being a congresswoman. So in other words, there's a lot of ethical things that she couldn't do, or when she pushed the boundaries of it, hiring her husband for private security, things like this, they were frowned upon. I think she will create her own kind of an independent squad type PAC and just live off that money. And remember, Brad, she would be welcome in Minnesota at rallies. She'd be welcome in New York. She can fly on other people's dimes throughout the country, have a pretty nice lifestyle. People want to hear her talk. There's a whole lot of people that view Cori Bush as a hero, Brad.
John, I'm going to say it again, and I know you're going to disavow my suggestion because you always do, but that movie, that documentary, I think it's called Rockin' the House or whatever it was. Remember I told you the documentary that followed 4 women who were running for Congress in the 2018 election. It's excellent. And once again, the four women, the two other women, I can't remember who they are. One of them was West Virginia, and she had an interesting background that I think her father died of mesothelioma. What is it? You know what I mean? The lung.
Mesothelioma.
Because he was a coal miner, and I can't remember who the other woman was. I think she was from Arizona. The two other women were Cori Bush, who lost. It was interesting because of the four women, three of them lost, and the fourth woman was AOC. Now that's what sold the documentary. And once again, I found it fascinating that there was either husband, wife, or two women, I can't remember which one, put the document together. I think they spent like $46,000 on it, and Netflix, if I'm not mistaken, bought it for $11 million. It's really well done, and I know you won't watch it because I recommend it. You know, see, all I have to do is, if I want to have John not do something, I just say, John, you got to go to this new restaurant. It's so good. And John will go, oh man, I'm never going there, right? Is that the way it works?
I would only go there if I could see a high-level Missouri politician having a conversation with a radio station owner, and then I could gab about it on the air.
You're talking
and then
about...
I could throw Glenn Beck into the mix and make up a whole story.
Are you talking about Tracy Ellis and Bill Eigel having lunch together?
I am telling that story, Brad. Hey, that's via Brad Hildebrand, and he is reputable when it comes to these things.
And I was in the room. I saw it happen. And matter of fact, I even told Bill that I would have gone over and say, hi, Bill, but Tracy would have immediately pulled off the knife off the table and stabbed me in the back. But that's a whole nother story. Okay.
If I were to go to a restaurant, I sure wouldn't go to Florida, Brad. That's story number one.
6:18, and, excuse me, why did I do that? Edit that out. Okay. Here we go. Number one.
The number one.
You can't turn on your television or your radio or any other communication device without seeing the devastation down in Florida. Governor Mike Parson is sending National Guard troops and other emergency personnel to Florida to aid in these Hurricane Milton response efforts. This story is brought to us by Kurt Erickson of the Post-Dispatch. And to be specific, Governor Parson says that there will be 100 Missouri National Guard soldiers, 21 state troopers, and 5 disaster medical assistance workers to aid in the relief efforts down there, Brad. The visuals are just nuts. I watched coverage for the first time yesterday. I haven't watched any of the Helene coverage or any of the Milton coverage until last night, and it was mind-blowing, Brad.
You know, there's something interesting that I heard last night, which I thought was sort of fascinating, because I never thought of this. One of the reasons, and this was an expert talking about this, he says one of the reasons that the government response to Helene was so bad in the eastern part, or actually the western part of North Carolina, eastern part of Tennessee and Kentucky, is that the FEMA people are not used to dealing with hurricanes in that region, because of the fact that most of the hurricanes are, along the coasts, and you look at like the topography of Florida, it's pretty much flat as a board, and a lot of those areas along the Gulf Coast, even like in the Gulf Coast of Texas, are pretty flat, and all of a sudden you got an area where it's hilly, mountainous, mini mountains if you want to look at it that way, not like the Rockies. I thought that was fascinating, because he said they were totally unprepared for that type of response. And I thought to myself, you know what, that makes sense.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that. And then I teased this earlier, Brad. Eric Schmidt did an interview on the Ingram angle with Laura Ingram, and was talking about Kamala Harris and that Biden-Harris response to this. He had a fantastic quote, which was, he was talking about watching Kamala Harris. He said, it's excruciating. It's like some sort of AI-generated robot, with an algorithm of gibberish. I think that deserves to be a drop on our show, Brad. An algorithm of gibberish.
I would love to see. I still say that Trump screwed up. Trump should have made Tulsi Gabbard his vice president, because she is just so impressive. Besides, I think she's a very attractive woman, and I love the fact that she's still in. She's in service to our country. She's still in. I have to double check. I believe she's still in the Hawaiian National Guard, and I believe she's like a colonel now. So, and she, unlike Mr. Walls, has actually been in combat. She didn't go to Italy and say, well, it's, things are tough here in Italy. They're shooting at me. The local people in Italy don't like me. They're shooting at me. No, she was actually in combat. I think she was in Kuwait and Iraq. Anyway, okay, we have to take a break. That is John Combest. You can check out his website at johncombest.com. You'll find all of the different things. He just essentially gave us the top 3, but he's got dozens of them on there. He does it every day. John, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?